Evet, herkesi saygıyla selamlıyorum.
I'd like to express my deepest gratitude to all of you. This is the Director General for Energy Affairs from Ministry of Energy and Natural Resources, Murat Zekeriya Aydın. I'd like to extend my deepest regards to my ministry. We are at another TWEC webinar organized by Turkish Wind Energy Association. On the occasion of this address, I would like to thank to all who contribute to this event, the audience, and in particular to TWEC, in particular for once again organizing another panel that is aimed to raise awareness. Now, if you allow me, of course, the topic of the panel is so important. As you all know, it is the wind and the solar energy that would enlighten our horizon for the future. And of course, the two resources that would be the backbone of our future. We will continue to discuss about the wind solar energy. And of course, financing of wind energy in the new era is actually one of the most important topics. We have very distinguished panelists today with us. And if you allow me, I very briefly would like to introduce them. Emre Hatem, Investment Banking Garanti Bank, the Financing and Investment Banking Director from Garanti BBVA. Murat Çolakoğlu is from PwC Turkey Energy Country Leader Murat Çolakoğlu, Akfen Renewable Energy CFO Özgür Uzunoğlu, and Heymi Bahar from International Energy Agency Senior Analyst. If you allow me, in this order, in the order of the introduction, I would like to give the floor to the distinguished panelists, and I would like to get their prospects with regards to financing of wind energy in the new era. But please keep your talk only with 6 to 7 minutes, because we would like to reserve some room for questions and answers. So I would like to start with Emre Hatem. The microphone is yours. Thank you very much, distinguished chair, with my deepest gratitude to all. First of all, I would like to go back to the future, the past, and give you a couple of figures just to understand about our success story. In the last 2 decades, according to the calculations we made in the electricity generation and distribution, $100 billion of investment made, $55 billion on green energy. And looking at the banks, especially a $40 billion worth of financing by the banks. Why these figures are so important? As for our own bank at the project financing credit portfolio, we have 50% of the share of the energy. And this corresponds to 10% of all credits by the bank. Therefore, energy industry is so important to us. And the banks in particular are having a significant contribution to this process. And thinking about the past, present, and the future of energy, it is of critical. Thanks to green energy investments, more than 50% of our installed capacity is based on green energy, and 40% of the generation, again, from green energy. In 2019, 2020, around 40% due to drought, at 35 to 36% because of the drought, there's a decline, but in general, 40% we can say in average. So it's quite a significant number. And our other approach is that what are the contributions of green energy to the economy? We made a study on our own, and we identified 3 pillars as a banker. The first thing is emissions. If green energy investments over 53,000 megawatts, if the investment not financed, not made, what would happen? That would be replaced by coal and natural gas. And therefore, it will make 75 million tons of greenhouse emission. Therefore, this these investments prevented 75 million tons of emission and corresponding to 15% of the entire emission of Turkey. 1 kilowatt hour of electricity generation, we emit actually less greenhouse. They're 15% of a decline when compared to a decade ago. Of course, the Green Deal and about the carbon at the border, all these issues would be on the topic more. The second topic is import. Thanks to these investments, 2.5 billion cubic meter of natural gas is substituted. So we did not have to import it. And considering the pipeline price, it will make $10 billion annual. And about the spot natural gas price, it is $1,000 in Europe, 1,000 cubic meter. It will make $25 billion of an annual cost that we would have to make if we did not have these investments. So these are so important. It's actually a saving that corresponds to almost the entire current deficit. And the other thing is electricity prices, the other topic. Thanks to the green energy investments, according to the study by our bank, the electricity price paid by the consumer actually reduced. How? What is the logic behind it? The electricity bill. The marginal generation cost when is low thanks to solar and wind energy. Therefore, and once the natural gas or coal power plants decommissioned or out of the system, which actually has higher costs, this actually reduces the electricity prices. Therefore, there is actually a decline on the electricity bill of the consumers. Therefore, from this perspective, on three main topics, emission, import, electricity prices, we can speak about significant contributions so far. And as Garanti BBVA, we have actually assumed the responsibility. As for the wind, for example, in the last 2 decades, 87 wind power plants financed. I mean, since 2004, we've been financing, and we are one of the banks who first financed wind energy. We are a leading bank, and $2.7 billion of credit given. And we have 25% of a market share. So one out of 4 wind power plants financed by Garanti so far. So what is actually the situation of these credits so far? We have no problem. I mean, all the credits are paid back timely, and there is actually no deferral, no need for restructuring, rework, and we actually have no default, and therefore the return to us has been so good. How we succeed in doing so? The first thing is that we establish an energy team, a team that is dedicated only to energy industry, doing projections, closely monitoring the industry, having a close cooperation and consultation with the Ministry of Energy and they are very meticulously and considering the industry with due diligence. And thanks to this energy team, we have succeeded in reaching these figures. What we will do in the future, very quickly, because I don't want to take too much of your time. Of course, naturally, the funds of the banks are limited. We don't have actually indefinite funds, so we have to use it optimally. So as a bank, we decided that we have limited resources. So we now at the discretion of using this only for green energy. We will no more financing coal or other fuel power plants, and we are the first Turkish bank to announce this. And therefore, all our funds will be used for biomass, geothermal, solar, wind, of course, will be the priority, but for green energy. So we'll continue to allocate funds for that. I don't know, maybe in the upcoming minutes, if you give me the opportunity, I at the same time would discuss about the total demand in the industry, I mean the annual investment requirement, to what extent the banks may contribute. If you wish, Director General, I will speak later. Thank you. We thank you. Thank you very much for your very distinguished contributions. So important findings. In the next round, I guess we also will continue with further, recommendations from you. I would like to move to Murat Çolakoğlu from PwC Turkey, and the floor is yours. Thank you very much, distinguished Director General. Actually, Emre passed me quite a nice ball and discussed about what Turkey succeeded in so far and how we could be successful for the future. Quite important data that you shared with us. We have limited time, so I will step back for a while and I will divide my talk in two parts. The global view and my suggestions for Turkey, a couple of tangible recommendations I will have for Turkey. What is going on in the world, the global approach? Why? There's so many things out of our control. And there is actually a shift of the axis, and there is also a disruption of the balance of powers. And the cards are reflushed, and the games of the rule are redefined. And therefore, it is important for Turkey to take part in this by taking correct decisions at the correct time. As you will know, every year, especially for renewable energy, for all subheadings, mainly wind, as you all know, looking at the world, and especially the eyes are turned to the Asian side. And once there's actually, for example, a delay in generation and so on, wherever the problem is, it is most originating from China. Once China actually had, for example, a cold, then the rest of the world is getting sick, and Turkey is indirectly a part of it. You know, despite all efforts of the United States and EU, that is the power of China, both financial and in terms of demographics, it actually has quite a big impact, and you can feel it. The second thing is that the Glasgow COP26 summit convened the countries, including us, of course. I'm so happy that we're a part of it. And there are some commitments undertaken by the countries, and some actions must be taken. We talked to so many people who joined the summit, and no one is pleased. And we are close to follow that. On the other hand, for renewable energy, we are focusing on, but still, in the upcoming decade, billions of dollars of investment, again, it would be for fossil fuel exploration. It will continue, and it's an ongoing process. I mean, it's not like now I have changed. I mean, for the energy investments, I just will be dealing with the renewable energy. Even there are actually oil companies doing so, and the majority of their budget allocated for that. So in the light of all these developments, I mean, put aside the things that are out of our control, we have to consider them so as to assess our country, and we have to take a decision and take action immediately. I have two suggestions now, Distinguished Director General, from this point on. One of them is the regulation. Now, the renewable energy and renewable energy, not only the investments about the generation of the renewable energy, but also the consumption side. Is actually there is a need for a threshold, maybe a framework regulation that would combine them both, because there is actually an incentive infrastructure that is so scattered. Regional, local, project-based, strategic, technology-focused, so many different titles. For example, in a title, once there's a change in the sentences, it actually can make a positive approach for hydrogen investment, millions of dollars of hydrogen investment by an investor. So I think it must be a bit user-friendly. I mean, must be maybe in the form of a guidelines. I mean, there is a need for a regulation as such because it does not exist. And I think it is very important to have a framework regulation. It could be incentives and everything. And incentives, generation, consumption. At the same time, you can have incentives for the consumers as well. I mean, for example, producers, you do it. I mean, for incentives, sometimes cannot be so positive. But how about the consumers? Maybe we can have some incentives for the consumers. We can have mechanisms, and we can have a regulation as such. And once we set incentive, we can speak about in the form of a tariff base, or it could be taxation, social security, about land allocation, interests, and so on. But it must be under a single umbrella. I mean, it must be easily comprehensible and so. And I will tell you why this is the case, why it should be the case. Now, I talked to a couple of people, and they told me, Murat, a topic is actually, there is the need for consultancy for a topic. Either it is a hot topic or there is actually a fire set and you have to put it on. And therefore, for example, ESG is, for example, sometimes a trendy topic and everyone is becoming a consultant. First, you have to understand what it serves for. And especially on the side of the government, it must be regulated, and especially there must be a common methodology, a description as such. Why I believe in this, for example, together with Emre and the other financing institutions, we actually have some talks. For example, Emre said that we are the one who gave most of the credits for the green energy. That is actually a source of pride. But the biggest problem that they have is that the common methodology, what is green energy, what is productivity and transformation, for example. I mean, if there is, for example, less carbon emission thanks to green energy, what it is, there is the need for common descriptions, common definitions for this in the industry. This is the case for all industries, but as in particular, someone actually should define it. This is actually the transformation. This is change. And of course, especially for banks, it will allow more bankability and at the same time, more access to financing, common methodology, common descriptions, common definitions, but more importantly, of course, we have to make sure that it can be monitored, it can be audited, both for the investor and the financiers. And therefore, this will have a positive contribution to the investment climate in the country. For example, tone equivalent oil, this actually must be no more the case. I mean, we should say, for example, carbon footprint. I mean, the definition also must be carbon footprint, including our regulation. We should have such a rhetoric in the regulation, but same not only for the producer, but at the same time for the consumer. We should use it. My second recommendation, I mean, so the first part is about regulation, the first recommendation. The second thing is that there is actually a taxation council. This is an institution established by law, and we are closely following it. And we have a representative at the executive committee, a great council working so well. And all the stakeholders are represented in the taxation council as an institution. And my suggestion is that, especially for the Director General, is it possible to have an energy council just like the taxation council? It will be a supreme council about all bodies and all the institutions and all the stakeholders, but it must be established under law. All stakeholders would be represented, the public, the private industry, and what is important is actually to have a consensus at this council. Maybe we'll speak about Green Deal later, which is linked to Green Deal. To what extent will be affected by what? Maybe I can talk more on the second round, but it's important to have an energy council. In COP26, especially, it's important to set the national goals and to have action plans for this. I believe that it would be a very useful body because it will be established under the law. It will have mission, vision, and a description of how to work, and it will be represented by all stakeholders. Please excuse me, but there is an inflation of associations in the industry. And of course, everyone is trying to do something with good intentions, but how about doing it under a single umbrella? I mean, we have to make sure that it serves to the country, serves to the benefit of the country. I mean, I believe it's possible to do so, because if we all have the same goal, I believe that everyone can work under the same roof. And it will work for what? It will open up the way for financing. Garanti Bank, all the other banks will have access to better credits, and will open up new money inflow channels. And it is only possible by way of a proper regulation, and at the same time by having a methodology and the standards to do so. And therefore, as it is mentioned, financing of wind energy in the new era. Of course, I focus on maybe renewable on my talk, but of course, I believe wind would be the leading in this. And therefore, with such works, both for the investors, for the financiers, we will open up the path for the country, and of course for the Turkish industry. And in terms of the trade, we will have a competitive environment. Maybe in the second round we can actually talk more on this. So thank you very much, Murat, for this great talk and for your recommendations.
Before moving to the third panelists, there is one note I'd like to remind all. Actually, for the sake of time, we want to confine our speaking time for the panelists so that we can get as more questions as possible. So I'd like to remind our distinguished audience that we are expecting their questions as well. And if there is anyone who is willing to post an answer, you can use the question board on the lower side of the panel. Now we are going to move on to the next panelist, Mr. Özgün Uzunoğlu from Akfen. Thank you very much, Mr. Director General. I'd like to start by expressing my appreciation to the organizers and stakeholders who have contributed in the organization of this event. I'd like to also salute the audience. As previously expressed by the panelists, I would like to provide an investor's perspective to the discussion. The first thing that I would like to point out is the position of Akfen in the renewable energy sector, specifically in the wind energy. Actually, this journey started about 15 years ago. EBRD and IFC also joined our venture. In this respect, we continued in a very fruitful way. Today, we have reached 706 megawatts of capacity, all generating electricity on renewables. Hydro, wind, and solar is in our portfolio. Actually, speaking specifically for the wind power, we have increased our investments in wind recently. 450 million worth of investment has been carried out in the last 4 years. And as this, such a group, we do have an accumulated know-how, both in the way of financing of the investment by the capital holders, and the financing of such investments by the banks. Ups and downs, of course, we've gone through the way, accumulated experience as expressed by Emre Bey. We know that the sector has been quite keen in making investments in the wind. Thereby, I'd like to thank my counterparts in the interest and the contributions they've been extending to our sector. Also, the suppliers, stakeholders, regulation, they all have a part to play in this puzzle. As for the future prospects, we see that there is this target on the table of adding minimum 1 gigawatts every year. From this perspective, we can say that the sector has a to embrace an investment of 6 to 7 billion US dollars, and minimum 5 to 6 billion US dollars of a funding is needed. How will it be furbished? It's really important. In the way of allocating this finance, the existing global conjuncture needs to be assessed as well. There is also the stricter financial policies that will be in play. Inflationist pressure due to the commodity prices will also be another issue. Therefore, in the new period to come, we need to consider long-term, lower cost local and international resources, maybe more than ever. Actually here, as the investors, our expectation from the regulators and stakeholders is to be involved in increasing the predictability in fund flows. And fundability also will be another issue. Therefore, we need the regulations that will be supporting that in line with the realities of the industry. There are several factors to be considered. Environment and social governance is an issue. Actually, here, such long-term finances will be available in regards of these requirements, and we've gone through a lot of practice in this. Every other day, as the investors, we've accumulate more experience in this respect. It's very good indeed, because around the world, in this period, global liquidity is increasing, albeit these stricter policies that will be introduced. I think ESG investments are still important investments that will be attracting funds. Therefore, I think we must ultimately make use of such availabilities. Yet, another thing is, within the light of the existing conditions, how the additional capacities to be introduced, we need to consider the structure of the existing auctions and also the base prices provided to the investors. There is one point of concern: more equity, more and better collateral capacity and structure. And of course, the effective management of such by the regulators, as we always did together. Provided such conditions are met, we do believe that favorable conditions can also be provided. So, as you know, in Turkey as well, there is the individual pension system. Through this, there is a major source of accumulated budget. I think complementary financial instruments must be used more effectively today. Actually, the tools of capital markets, such as the green, of course, bonds that are now getting to be popular in Turkey. But all of these availabilities require a predicted and predictable cash flow. Actually, here, the investors who will be there to make the investments, I think, will need to be attracted by some incentives, maybe tax incentives, because at the end of the day, we are ultimately targeting reduction of carbon footprints. These are really critical investments that will be serving for this purpose. So I believe that the investors should be provided such opportunities, because in wind, we do see that we have more productivity going around. Today, any investment that you're basing yourself on units cost will provide better yield and productivity, which is, I think, the advantage of the process. Maybe complementary factors can be considered to increase diversity here, and this will also provide new alternatives from the side of the creditors. I think it's going to be really an important piece of the puzzle. I'd like to stop here would like to thank everyone, Mr. Director General, and thank you, Özgür Uzunoğlu, for a very good use of time as well, and thank you for your contributions as well. We will proceed with your comments once we get all the questions. If I may, I would like to move on to Mr. Hemi Bahar, International Energy Agency representative. Mr. Bahar, the floor is yours. Thank you. Thank you very much to all the panelists. And I also would like to thank the TWEA, the Turkish Wind Energy Association. Hello, everyone from Paris. I'd like to take a look at the trends around the world. Would like to elaborate a bit how Turkey is, or if Turkey is ready. But maybe before that, I'd like to reiterate some of the issues as the International Energy Agency last May. You would remember that we published a report for net zero emissions. The report also has a chapter on investment costs. Within the next 3 decades, almost approximately $140 trillion equivalent of a clean energy investment must be made around the globe. These are gigantic figures, of course, but what is the implication of these figures? I mean, we are speaking about almost 2.5% of the GDP today, but by 2050, it will need to increase to 4.5%, which means that the contribution of the green energy sector will be higher in the pie of the, the proportion of energy to GDP, global GDP. Electrification, solar, wind, electricity sector will be representing most of it. Yet there is a long path to go, because currently we are speaking about the 300 gigawatts worth of a wind to solar capacity annually. We need to multiply that by 5 very quickly so that we can meet our targets. Here, of course, there is a different way of transforming the energy sector. We are speaking about a new energy sector where, of course, the finances will have a big role to play, because the pre-investment will be big and the energy economy will be shifting to wind and solar, where you need to make the entire investment from the outset, which means there is a high risk, and the risk will be going down in years. There is a big contribution to that, because we are experiencing volatile electricity prices and gas prices, and the answer to this problem will be renewable energy, but the investors are a bit concerned about the initial investment costs. As the IEA, the International Energy Agency, our perspective for keeping financial costs low, provided that the initial investment will need to be made for such projects, and considering that these will be lower risks in a longer duration, such as 20, 30 years of time, how can we make it in the lowest way? How much can we go down so that we can build new capacity will be our elaboration, our priority. Of course, to be able to do that, we would first need a long-term policy. In terms of the impact of the long-term policy on finances can be given from simple examples from Europe and the United States. In the US, there is a tax incentive to support the investments. It will end by the end of every year, and then 1 year will not be renewed, and the next year will be renewed. And in Europe, there is this auction system where the pre-announced annual capacity will be calculated for the next 10 years, considering and comparing the financial costs. US has higher finance costs than Europe. And yet, these are the countries that will have a potential of development that is at the equal level. This is really important because America is financing wind and solar projects at higher costs than Europe. It's an important parameter. because wind and solar plants are working to be financed only through a long-term contract system. This is something related to high initial investment costs, at least to meet the investment. There are two important trends going around the world. One is the auction system that is executed by Turkey as well by a 10 or maybe 20-year plan, because it would give maneuverability to the investors. The second approach for facilitating finances is the bilateral corporate PPAs, where the companies are cutting deals with energy companies. Compared to 5 years ago, the volumes have increased by 30–40% now. There are hybrid financing methods. I mean, some based on auction, some merging, or some, bilateral agreements. I mean, this can also be also evolving into the attempts of finding finances. For that, of course, we need the required legislation, the regulatory framework, but we must elaborate more on how we can provide diversity in the financing of these projects for the sake of sustainability, because we're speaking about very high volumes, which can only be achieved by market acceptability. Another point I'd like to highlight here is wind financing is equal to grid financing, and this is something that we all need to know. Also, the wind investors must go beyond their isolated, corners, and will need to be opened up together with the solar investors. And also we need to see each other in a complete fashion. This is the world that we're heading towards. Also, from the grid perspective, I think the investment sector will have some difficulty in financing the grids. As the IEA, we believe that the investments there will be moving slower than the wind and solar investments themselves. I think this is really a critical point, because the financing requires a big budget as well. There are several risks that we need to emphasize. These are the risks about finances going around the world, and in Turkey in particular. One is for specifically for the wind licensing and permits. Comparing wind versus solar, unfortunately, the investors will need to undertake big liabilities in the wind projects. At the same time, they will need to collaborate with a variety of stakeholders for permissions as well. This is becoming a problem around the globe, and investors are willing to find other projects such as solar that will be an easier way of moving on. Of course, we need to get in some processes to shorten that time and maybe to make the process simpler. In the next decade or so, we will have the issue of social acceptance as well. In other words, the public, the society embracing wind projects. It's a big barrier in Europe in particular. And for that, we need to get in a consensus to understand how the society can be involved in financing. In Europe, this has emerged as a solution, which is also becoming a potential solution in the United States as well. Maybe for Turkey, this is not a huge problem, but it'll come in the years ahead of us. The society must embrace these projects, must also be there, also be involved in the model for facilitating the finances as well. I think we need to think straight ahead. For the wind sector, we can say that from a 20-year deflation, we've shifted into inflation where the prices are increasing, and we do not know for sure how and when this will come back. But this is something that is unusual for the renewable energy sector that we're finding ourselves in, which was thought to last for 1 month and then 2 months, then 6 months, but yet it has extended even to the moment that we're in because of the supply chain problems, and maybe more importantly, with the influence of China. Yet I believe that it's not merely limited with China, but also is extended around the world, and we do not know for sure when it will be over. But for the financing sector, it's really critical for the mere reason that once we conclude the contracts, the prices are also increasing, and the solution is to find finances from one corner to the other. Actually, in terms of the financing, we need, or we can see some kind of moves that will be needed. Therefore, it's really important to manage the risks properly. And as we do not know how long it will take, and it's really extended its time. Another issue is about increasing interest rates, at least in various parts of the world, including Turkey, because since Turkey is affected by the global markets, increasing interest rates become an important issue. Because as we have higher interest rates, as the investment costs are rising, and we become unsure about how much money we will be allocating to this item. Therefore, it's really critical to reduce at least the project risks and turning back to licensing and permissions. I think this has some way of association with that as well. Now, 3 points will need to be elaborated on in the period ahead of us. Number 1, hydrogen, hybrid number 2, and number 3 is, of course, storage, battery technologies, how they will be integrated. I think it's really critical for the future of the wind energy. Thank you. Thank you, sir. Heymi Bahar. Now, if I may, I'd like to move on to the questions, as we are receiving a lot of questions, and as they come, I think we need to start addressing, maybe bunching out some questions, and I myself will be there to address some of them. Why are the renewable energy projects slower? Can we not abandon fossil fuels at once, and let's just stop it at a point in time and switch gears to renewables? There is this perception that the growth of the renewable energy sector is lower than in Europe. But, to give you the figures, I think you will have a better idea. OECD and European Union are, the organizations of developed countries. The increase in energy demand rates is, OECD average is minus 0.3%. Now, this is the figure I'd like to attract your attention to understand what we are trying to manage here, what we're facing. OECD average in the last 2 decades increased by minus figures. So there is no growth. I mean, minus 0.3%. So what is about Turkey? 3.1%. Primary energy we are speaking about here. As Mr. Murat said, actually, we need to transform it into a carbon footprint, and we need to speak about a million ton equivalent. We have to make that comparison now. In average, primary energy demand increase is 3.1% in Turkey. United Arab Emirates RABCAM rates minus 1.8, Spain minus 5.5, Germany minus 1%. This is really important. So in this country, there is still a high demand for energy, but despite of this increase in demand, you get into the league of renewables with the investments you're making. One more thing that is important, is there any country that has more energy demand than Turkey? In the last 20 years, 3.1% for Turkey for primary energy demand, and 3.1% also belongs to India. And more than India, it is only China that has almost 6% of a demand for primary energy. It is important to be aware of that. It is important to know what we are facing. And I briefly would like to give you figures about electricity. In the last 2 decades, average demand increase for electricity is 4.4%. Is there any country who has, almost the same level of this increase? India, almost the same level of increase. Who is number one? China. China, of course, around 6% again. European countries, and also United Arab Emirates, minus figures. Italy shrank. The same is true for Germany. So OECD average is plus 0.5%. So there is this effort of managing a sphere demand increase, and at the same time, renewable investments are needed to be attracted. This doesn't happen overnight. And if we shut off all the fossil fuels and the next day we're starting off with renewables, have a good chance. This is really important. As Mr. Hatem emphasized, this is really a unique price increase in energy. 1,000 cubic meters of natural gas is priced more than $2,000. And at this point, what is the reaction of developed countries? We've seen that maybe, say, in the United Kingdom, coal power plants that are 40, 50 years old are still being used. They are not decommissioned yet, and these available coal plants are now being introduced in use. Of course, from a broader perspective, maybe Jaime Bey can share with us how the countries will have to increase their fossil fuel shares from their existing resources, as he has already provided us some information. But around the world, there is this kind of a fluctuation that's going on. It's turbulence, and the countries will need to make a decision. 40, 50-year-old coal plants are not decommissioned yet, merely for this reason. They are keeping such plants for energy supply security. They're keeping them in their pockets so that they will use them whenever needed. Of course, transition to renewable energy will be a process. We do not have infinite resources. Technological development together with the capacities, we will see this decline. But we do not expect it to go down to zero immediately, because the initial investment cost 5-10 years ago, it was at the level of million euros per megawatt for solar investments, but today it's more reasonable. But probably no one expects to get it down to zero. There is also this financial restrictions, as Mr. Bahar already emphasized. At the point of permissions, there are some distances to be taken. It doesn't happen overnight to carry out the energy transformation, particularly in countries where there is a steep increase in demand. So we cannot expect expensive technologies to come and play overnight, and we cannot expect storage capacities to be higher. Hopefully, once we get to lower capex levels in storage investments, probably in the future, but we need to keep in mind that there are some limitations with the conditions at hand. Let's move on, with hydrogen immediately. And the question is, what is the electrolyzer capacity around the world? Because at the end of the way, you need to produce hydrogen with something. So there are some physical limitations that we have to keep in mind. Also, renewable energy resources must be supported, particularly in the transition period. But without being impacted by natural events, maybe we need base load to run steady, particularly in the transition period, so that energy security will be also maintained. Okay, thank you very much for this first round. I'm sorry, it's been quite a long comment, as covering several questions at once.
So if you allow me, I would like to start with Emre Hatem, and I will address two questions to you. The questions in general are, in the upcoming period, as you all know, also at YENKDEM, as TL-based, we actually had a feeding tariff mechanism. And therefore, at the same time, the wind power plants, actually, we're not saying that that's got something to do with the feeding tariff that we're doing under YEKDEM, because we're doing auctions there. So it's not only wind and solar that we should consider the topic, because the TL-based YEKDEM prices and that we have, if, for example, we are not asking this question with the expectation that these prices will be applicable. As they are not going to be performed with the YEKDEM prices mentioned there, but as you all know, from now on, with a few number of projects in solar and wind, we have a YEKDEM price, but it is again the auctions that conducted by the ministry that we set the prices. Both under the framework of the YEKA auctions, the prices are set. Therefore, the YEKDEM prices has got nothing to do with this. The auctions that we're doing in here. This is also the case, as you know, in the world, there is actually auction mechanisms. They are much more dominant, and all the countries, especially for the renewable energy resources, because in particular, sometimes limited for their connection to the system. And I would like to underline once again that we have to increase this availables. They are interrupted resources. So we sometimes actually have some difficulties in terms of connection of the renewable energy to the system. So capacity allocation auctions, just like we are doing in our country, are being performed worldwide. So I will a bit change the question. It is not only limited to wind and solar. Think about YEKDEM TL base. And as for the resources that we are no more doing auction, there's some guarantee prices, and their escalation, their updates are so important. Therefore, for TL-based investments, and at the point of long-term financing of these, what are the solutions that you have? What are the areas at risk? Maybe you can comment from this perspective, and right after that, even if the prices are set at the auction, as you all know, also in our auctions, we continue with TL-based prices. So with the escalation and with foreign currency escalation and also the inflation basket, we are trying to update the prices. So therefore, about the update of the prices in terms of the methodology to be applicable, what are your suggestions, especially so as to ensure long-term financing? what are the risks that you identify, and what suggestions you might have. I know I had made quite a long introduction and a long question, but the microphone is yours. So thank you very much both for the introduction and the question. But as I told you, as the banks, we are in close consultation with the Ministry of Energy during the YEKDEM process, and with before the announcement of the new YEKDEM, we also had so many meetings, and we had the chance to mention about our approach, about our perspective as the banks. Now, we always focus on solution-oriented discussions, and I'm sure that we will set the best solution for the industry. There is one thing that we always mention, and I would like to underline it. For YEKDEM, I mean the previous YEKDEM, the dollar-based, ended by June 2020. If you're asking me, it was the best, the most successful mechanism ever. While financing these projects, when we have had the structure of the YEKDEM, when we approached the committee, they were always asking, it's okay, $7.3 of a warranty and 13.3 in solar, such a warranty. But after financing in the future, whether the government will change this or not, because this happened in Spain. Retrospectively, they acquired already rights, actually retrospectively abolished as a risk factor. And then we said there's no such example in Turkey. I mean, there's no retrospective change, and we have actually no such expectation that we set then. And of course, the amount of warranty given does not have quite a high subsidy when compared to the market, because in Europe, so high feed-in tariff was the case. Therefore, and maybe there was a retrospective approach eventually there, but there's no such risk. And we were right to say that, looking at 15 years, looking at the YEKDEM mechanism worked so well, the payments made, and no retrospective change. And therefore, the investors or the banks actually did not incur any loss. Therefore, so important. And therefore, if you're asking me, it's really important to underline this success. But of course, in the new era, the mechanisms could be changed according to the changes. There was YEKDEM in the past, it will change, and we will have something else right now. But we are aware of the fact that we have to be flexible. But the newly introduced mechanism, we really worked on so well, 26%, the consumer prices index, the producer prices index, and the euro and dollar indexed system. We worked so hard on this. For example, the cost, so the investment cost, the financing cost, all the consumer price index, producer price index, we considered them all. I mean, the equation is a bit complicated. In the past, the 7.3 US dollar cent, so easy. But now in the new system, you require financial engineering. What the foreign currency would be, dollar, euro, the consumer, the producer price index, and so on. A more sophisticated equation, not as easy as it was in the past, but 52% Turkish liras of an escalation. But we also have to consider the operating costs. I mean, the operating costs are mainly based on the foreign currency. Once you put it included in the math and the calculation, this free cash flow that we call this time, which is going to be used in credit repayment, it is 70%, and for foreign currency, 30%. I mean, 70% is a Turkish lira in another approach, I would say. So as a financier, as we do not take this risk, there's I mean, a Turkish lira credit would not be given so far. I mean, not possible to use it foreign currency. It would be maximum at 30%. So 70% would be Turkish liras. That's the maths that we have. So about the use of more Turkish lira credit is required. And the banks in the long run, can they actually give long-term Turkish lira credit, yes, they can give it. Of course, looking at the position of the banks now, I would like to put it on the table. Mainly, we are actifying ourselves with the again, deposits and the foreign currency deposits. By spotting the central bank, we convert it in Turkish liras and we send it. We also have a certain amount of Turkish lira deposit. And of course, the actually due dates are shorter when compared to the credit payment. So there is actually, you give a 10-year, for example, credit over Turkish liras, but your, for example, deposit account is 1 to 2 or 3 months as the due date. So from the mathematical calculation, what we observe is that considering the interest rates today and the escalated producer consumer price indexes, the problem that we have is that throughout 10 years, all the projects, they have good profitability, they're feasible. I mean, the project return is good, but in the first 2 to 3 years, the project has difficulty in repaying the credit because of the relatively higher level in Turkish lira credit, because looking at the interest rate, the Turkish lira based interest rate, it is, and the foreign currency, euro dollar based credit. So the Turkish lira is actually disadvantageous. So the project cannot repay. So we actually, there will be higher equity rates. So there will be the need for higher equity rates initially. What could be the case for now, I mean, as a solution? So the more foreign currency credit is included, so maybe 30% would be higher, so the interest rate burden, the interest burden would be less, or at least just like the previous year, then maybe there will be a base price. And then the bank, again, over foreign currency credit could possibly make a funding to the project. For now, the investors are telling us that we don't have too much projects. I mean, we do a math calculation. I mean, if we receive a project, how we would approach, but tangibly, I would say we don't have too much tangible projects. Maybe the more that we have some projects on the table, the tangible ones, I don't know, maybe the feasibility will be rechecked accordingly based on an actual project. But of course, with the support of the consumer producer price index, the YEKA prices are around 33 cents now, 41. I checked it recently from the website, and in January 2020, when announced, it was $4.3. I mean, for wind and solar, the YEKA price, so it makes 3.30 US dollar cents. I mean, there is a decrease US dollar, an increase in TL, but I mean, by, you know, playing with the variables of the equation, trying to have an optimum again, capital investment amount, but 25, maximum 30% of an equity rate must be the case. So the investors will be much more welcomed. So it's a bit higher in our opinion. So there will be the need to make some, I guess, regulations. So it could be made much more optimal. My final word, distinguished Director General, is that for us, for example, our banks has targets allocating specifically green energy credits. I mean, we set a goal, a target, and the banks are willing to give these credits. It's our own, under our own mandate. So we would like to provide financing to the industry. And at this point, we are open to all solutions. As I told you, that is the perspective that we have, because there's huge investment need of Turkey. As you mentioned, there's an increasing demand, how it is going to be met. At least, in my opinion, for energy consumption increase from now on, must be met from energy, green energy. At least in doing so, going to zero carbon goal would be much easier. There's $5.6 billion of a wind solar investment must be made so as to meet the increasing energy demand. But of course, there's also another topic, as you mentioned, the already operational coal, natural gas power plants. Of course, not possible to transform them in a fortnight, but 2053 net zero carbon target that we have. We announced it as a country. So we will be a zero carbon country. So we have 31 years ahead. It looks like a long period of time, but if you're asking me, we should take steps right now. And the fossil fuel power plants, their transformation, as I'm telling you, not in a fortnight, but in the upcoming years, we also have to consider it. And there also will be the need for financing for this. We mentioned about storage investments would also be a part of it. Therefore, there is, so as to meet the increasing electricity demand, and at the same time for the transformation of the already existing fossil fuel power plants, there's the need. So as looking, 60% of our demand is from fossil fuels, so 200 million kilowatt hours of a consumption. So we have to bring it down to zero if we would like to have net zero by 2053. And 70-80 megawatts of wind or solar energy required. And if you just deploy it or break it down into the years, so storage, of course, is another discussion. As I told you, the storage at the same time must be a part of it. As there is interrupted energy supply, we will have no problem. So in a nutshell, I would like to say, so three main topics that we focus as the bank: the energy efficiency, the less that we consume, so we will have more economic value. $1 of a GDP to produce it, we have to consume less energy. So the electricity motors must be refurbished, or in the industry, energy efficiency at households and so on. We are actively working. The second topic is 100% green energy production, green electricity production generation. I mean, also we would like to have it 100%. And the third thing is that electrification in transportation. I mean, even if the electricity is turned 200% green in transportation, in our vehicles, in the trucks, in the buses, and so on, if you continue to use fossil fuel oil, then we cannot have net zero targets. So there is also the need for a breakthrough in electrification. So we have products for these three areas, and we offer them to our customers. So briefly, I would like to say the banks are willing to give full support. However, it is not possible for the local banks to do it on their own. According to our calculations, energy efficiency, green electricity generation, transformation of energy, this is a $10 billion worth of an investment required on an annual basis. So half of this can be met by the Turkish banks, I mean, annually, $4-5 billion. But the remaining $5 billion must be found elsewhere. So the international financing institutions must be a part of it. I don't know, maybe capital markets must be used more, and so. Thank you. Thank you very much. Good. And at this point, there is something that I would like to underline, which I believe, I don't want to steal time from the audience or you, but Emre Hatem underlined a topic that is so important. Until 2053, I mean, our goal is to have net zero emission. That's the goal that we have. So I think we actually have to take some steps so far. And in December, as the Minister of Energy, both in the electricity market law and the natural gas law, we actually turned it into a law, as we always discuss with the association. So the long-term energy plan is in a year, we will be sharing it with the industry. how European Union is setting forth this 2050 targets and saying that by 2050, as wind and solar, in terms of interrupted resources, I will have 57% of a share in the entire production, if they can possibly say it. And some of the visionary targets, of course, also considering our infrastructure, we will be able to put it, and it's going to be important, and I think it will be leading for the industry. And of course, as Emre Hatem stated, the 2053 goal, so as to reach it, what our roadmap will be much more clear. Now, so far, we actually have established a good capacity, which is an important project, I would like to say. I would like to share it with the audience, and it is at 3.54 years of the project, and within the framework of EU, again, KENS funding. As the Ministry of Energy, we have a modeling team. This is the long-term energy scenario modeling used by EU. So the software and the hardware is available to us. And so we have completed a project for this, for the modeling. So long-term energy planning would be possible. So we don't have any technical obstacle. So hundreds of hours of training provided. We have a modeling team, as I told you. This already started as we propose that the day will come. So with the support of our minister, projects lasted in 3.5 to 4 years. Is over now, so we actually can't possibly make the scenario works all together. And in this scenario works, as Emre stated, in 2050, in 2045, or in 2055, including heavy transportation, will it be possible for you to make electrification of all transportation means, or it is in 2045, and so of course, by considering the infrastructure and considering the economic growth and transformation, and at the same time, by considering all the contribution of the stakeholders, you should be able to do so. And in the upcoming 1 year, that's how we designed the law. In the upcoming year, we will do the modeling, and we don't have to wait for this year. And therefore, I think we could possibly share it with our industry. So our long-term roadmap will be developed. So in December, we also completed the regulation and the strategic budget of the presidency. And with, for example, the Ministry of Forestry, with the Ministry of Industry, Ministry of Transportation, and all. And therefore, in consultation with all, we are working hard on this. So therefore, we will actually make the projections so far. Of course, specific to the Turkish Wind Energy Association, we would like to thank them. And therefore, so they are also working on a study, and so we actually have the chance to make an assessment altogether. Therefore, including, of course, Garanti Bank, as well as Emre Hatem stated, I don't know, maybe so as to further increase their participation or for better financing, we will have a base price, I mean, whether or not. We have worked on this, and in the upcoming period, I don't know, maybe also there will be foreign financing. I mean, it will be at base price practice at the same time that will allow for the use of foreign currency financing. And we will also check it with escalation and make a comparison. And therefore, comparison with the base price, and make sure that it actually does not go down the base price. There will be such a regulation, because as a part of our formula on US dollar together with the TWEA, considering the historical data, we are trying to understand what fluctuations could be possible. So as a result of all these joint works, we will come to an end for our works. I don't know, maybe if it is positive in a short while, just like there's a ceiling price, at the same time, maybe there will be a threshold price in our YEKA auctions. In Rehatem, actually, we did not receive so much demand, but I guess there will be more demand for credits. As you all know, 4,000 megawatts of a YEKA auction that so far, and 4,500 megawatts auction is on the way. Of course, there's a fluctuation in the foreign currency and in economy. We have a fluctuation also. There is a fluctuation in the foreign currency. And as a result of this fluctuation, of course, especially for the auctions to be in December and January, we'll make it April, May, June. In 2020, we postpone them. So we have reset the timeline for the auctions. And once they are completed, and I hope that they will increase, and I mean, there will be more attraction to renewable energy investments, as I guess. Once again, I'm sorry that I interrupt the flow, and so many questions are coming. And of course, we also have some questions from the press members, especially in terms of investment to the fossil fuels and the others. They ask what our approach to fossil fuel investments are. It is renewable, renewable, renewable, but that we focus on. But it doesn't mean that in the world there is actually no investment on fossil fuels. This is not the case. For example, to that specific reporter, thank you very much for the question. And as you all know, it's not possible to predict it. In Germany, for example, right now, they are building a coal power plant. I mean, I don't know if you know it or not, but the perception is totally different. I think we understand how important perception management is. In 2023, in Germany, there will be a ceremony for this coal power plant to be operational. As you all know, Germany, by 2038, gave the commitment that they will totally be free from coal. Of course, so many commitments made so far, so many aggressive and ambitious targets set so far. But of course, to what extent they are possible, it's another discussion point. But I think the point in here is that there is a coal power plant that is now built, so it will work only for 15 years. So they will shut it down by 2038, as I told you previously. I think the energy security, energy supply security, so as to ensure for this, during a transition period, the fossil resources at the same time would be in the play. And of course, there will be more investments to the renewable energy resources. But of course, as a reference to this question, whether nuclear is renewable or not, that's what we are being discussed right now. Mainly, for example, France, a group is saying that, yes, it is actually green investment. But Germany, for example, and others are saying that, no, it is not. But the last draft is, yes, it is green energy. So there is actually, at the same time, the nuclear energy investments are now considered to be under green energy. Therefore, probably there is a prediction that in the upcoming 3 to 4 decades, there will be huge investments on nuclear energy. Therefore, of course, there are so many other technologies that we'll be discussing: fusion, hydrogen, and storage, for example. In the energy industry, for example, storage is so important. That is actually one of the pillars that we have. It will be hydrogen and fusion that we'll be discussing in the future. Therefore, we also have made some long-term planning, I would say. So right now, if you allow me, because we have to use time properly, and I would like to give the floor to Murat, because many of the questions are addressed to him: the Green Deal and also carbon at the border. to what extent, what do you think would happen? What type of developments do you think will happen? Very briefly, please. Thank you.
Teşekkür ederim efendim.
Thank you, sir. So to be quick, I can say that the European Union has executed a very comprehensive legal legislative framework and the current legislation aims at making sure that within the European Union limits will be set and prices for taxation will be defined within the EU depending on the carbon footprint. If the country is like Turkey, for instance, in my example previously, a carbon-based legislation system we have, but let's assume that we don't have such, and we are not paying attention, and we are polluting the environment as we want. If I am producing an item in Turkey and trying to sell it to the EU, the draft legislation also will stipulate that there will be a stopping, warning sign that will indicate carbon border tax. Meaning that I will have to consider the amount of carbon released to the environment when I'm producing or manufacturing a product. Unless you make your production in line with EU standards, of course, this is really comprehensive. It's not something merely about the type of the product that you're producing, but it's from end to end supply chain, indicating your manufacturing footprint. So if you don't pay attention to that, you must also pay a premium, carbon premium probably to be named as, or carbon border tax to the European Union when you're exporting an item. You will have to endure that cost. Who will be paying for that cost? Probably the importer of the item to the EU will have to endure the cost. Therefore, it will make you unpreferable. Or there will be others who make, the production in line with the rules with more favorable prices, and they will be preferred over you. So it's up to whether it's really fashionable or it's really required. Actually will need to be discussed thoroughly. In my opinion, speaking for every sector, the companies will need to sit and think about it because there are some priority industries such as steel or manure or cement in the European Union. Particularly if you're linked with these sectors, the size of the carbon emission footprint probably will have the potential of creating a problem in selling your items or products to the EU. The European Union has an acquis that is accumulated like 400, 500 pages, and Poland is producing 60 to 70% from coal, and France 70, 80% from nuclear. Germany still is investing in coal. I mean, you can never understand. Now you have to first settle your own home issues. You may say this, but when it comes to trade, it might not be as such. If they're buying items from abroad, Turkish exporters say may have a problem when they want to sell their products to the EU markets, unless they have consumed electricity from renewable resources and have, let carbon emission footprint by way of not using hybrid or electrified vehicles in their production, or maybe to the way that your employees paid attention to the Green Deal. There are some international institutions that are running some tests to check your fitness for these rules, and you can even check yourself online. And what you have to do is to raise your index And as long as you keep your index high, you may not have an impeded trade, may have an impact on your business or may have an impact on your sustainability. You cannot say that, okay, I have a good carbon footprint. You need to look from A to Z in link to your supply chain, sales, everything. So as PwC, we're almost 3,000 people almost, and multiplying it with 3 or 4, counting in the families, all the households, we have an impact group of 10,000 people. So we start by taking measures within ourselves about electrified vehicles, about consumption of electricity, consumption of water. We are using renewable energy in all our offices, and this is a transformation going on around the world. And what is the support that we are giving to our clients? And Garanti Bank is furbishing money, and we advise our clients as to how they must use the money once they are furnished with the money from the bank. So we identify their needs. We try and look into how they may not harm their trade from a visionary perspective. So what is important is not today, but how you'll be doing like 4 or 5 years later. You will have to care about it, because so far, in terms of the legislation, if it's not the EU, it would be the OECD. If not, it would be the World Trade Organization. So the rules or the sequence of rules will need to be put forth on the table. And once you are to face the rules, it may be too late to take a measure. So what it matters is to take, measures from today to identify the needs of your company. You need to take a look at your carbon emission footprint, what kind of measures you must take about it, action plan, which is also relevant to your financing, whether it's green loans, whether, the banks are going to take a look at it as well, whether it's truly a green investment, or if you want to increase your capacity, is it truly a green capacity increase? It's like lottery. I can say yes, you may say no, and both would be right, because everybody will have different rights. So in this respect, to make the story short, the Green Deal will have an impact, absolutely, and inevitably. The Ministry of Environment also already published an action plan for the Green Deal. And in terms of this harmonization plan, whatever the Green Deal will bring, it will have a direct impact on our daily lives, on our trade, on everything. That's all for the moment. Thank you for your inputs. And we have already consumed our time now. But maybe we can stretch a bit. We can ask for some extra time from our panelists and our audience, since it's really a critical topic we're discussing. And I will try to finish in 10 minutes, because as it's a critical matter, there will be a lot of things to think and to discuss about. And I will need to give some more time to Özgür Uzunoğlu, maybe stretching our time a bit. Mr. Uzunoğlu, since you are an investor, you can have a thorough interpretation of how all this would impact your trade. In terms of the capacity increase, we want to encourage local content and local equipment. Therefore, in terms of capacity increases, what is your projection for the financing of this capacity increase? What is your perspective? What do you think? How this would, impact the financing, whether it will be facilitated or not, and what is your projection at this point? Sure, thank you for the question. The first thing maybe that I need to say is capacity increases as in a continuum of our investment in wind that we've made so far. Actually, we're one of the first companies that has already taken an action there. For an extra capacity of 92 megawatts, we've taken our licenses. So as you have rightfully said, we are following it quite closely, and we believe that it will absolutely have a positive impact. First, and maybe the most important thing we've done is to consider the hybrid investments in our project basket. Therefore, currently, we are speaking about the first financial actions taken on the hybrid side, but in terms of the additional capacity, we're getting ourselves prepared. Within the framework of the new regulation, I think that there will be a lot of positive impacts on us and on the way that we are doing our business. And in particular, of course, since there will be the market mechanism to be involved for the cells, and considering the existing trends, I can say something that we have been observing in energy prices. There has been an increase not only in the local basis, but also in the global one, especially EBRD also is speaking about the inflationist impact of Green Deal. There are some predictions of the European Central Bank also about that. And actually, in this respect, they may also have an impact in the expansionist monetary policies, which means that extra capacity investments will probably require a stronger cash flow in the feasibility. Of course, at this point, we must also consider the new regulation as having an impact on the foreign ECA credits. How the impacts here will be elaborated further. As said by Emre Hatem, in such kind of financings, wherever the cheap funds are, we need to go there, because otherwise it will not be possible for us to accomplish those projects. So around all these parameters, I think we will have to redesign our expectations, which I have to say is quite positive for the long run. Creditors, suppliers will have to be there to also identify the pricing, but probably we'll need more time to set all this, because our first priority is the feasibility action. But as I say, for the extra capacity increase, I do believe that the market conditions are all favorable, at least going in that direction. I'm sure that there will be a lot of support for that as well, because as I said, the capital market instruments also must be enjoyed, through some mediatory agencies or capital funds. Therefore, I think these funds would have an additional positive factor. Thank you for your contribution, for your valuable assessment. We've already beyond our time, but we cannot say that it's open-ended and we'll have to finish as quickly as possible. I hope that our audience has been enjoying the session as we are, as the panelists, because all the inputs have been quite valuable. Now that we're out of the routine, I'd like to turn to Hemi Bahar. Now, we've talked about natural gas, and there is an unusual increase in natural gas prices. From $40-50, it's come to $240, coming back to $150, and we say it's dropping, but it's threefold increase, but it's still an increase. It's really an enormous demand that is coming up, and So briefly, please, because really we don't have time, but your opinion would be quite valuable at this point. And can you please elaborate a bit on why we're going through this, why this happens, what are the main factors behind this? And in terms of the renewable energy motivations within the EU, I'm speaking, would this hinder motivation or encourage motivation? And in terms of an increase maybe in the renewables investments, do you think that we can expect an impact there as well? I will try to be brief. Actually, the year 2021, unfortunately, has been a record year for the coal demand. Unfortunately, it's already been that way. The report has not yet been announced, but according to our calculation, this is going to be the case. Although, we've been discussing altogether as the country is on the contrary, unfortunately, we have been seeing, record-breaking increase in the coal demand. At the same time, together with the economic growth on the side of China and continued by EU and the United States, in the energy, 2021 post-COVID period, there has been an increase in energy demand as the data would maybe change from one institution to the other. We would expect a potential achievement actually in this respect. On the supply side, there have been various problems such as Russia, oil and gas producing countries. Also, this would have an influence. Plus, on top of that, some problems in the supply chain added up. Also, the maintenance work that were delayed and postponed in the COVID period came on top of that. Plus, it's been a bad year for wind in the European Union, and it's been a bad year for hydro in the entire world, including Turkey. Putting them all together, we end up with a situation as you have very well summarized. An interesting theory is there, transition to clean energy policies. In my opinion, is the AIA. This has nothing to do with the previous, the foundation. On the contrary, since the countries have not yet invested sufficiently in renewables, we're going through a volatility. 250 to 300 euro of electric price is applied per megawatt hour in the European Union, and it's been there for many months, many previous months. In 2021, the European Union applied 35 euro per megawatt hour for wind and solar. In their contracts, they have executed this price for the new year. You will see that. It matters because the subsidies are also declining because of high energy prices. In the long-term contracts, particularly for renewables, subsidizing is the top point. It's the maximum point of the market as priced. But, to make the story short, in the European Union, maybe this has some kind of a motivation for a swifter or a quicker transition to renewables, as many policymakers would support in the European Union. As the International Energy Agency, we know that there is no luxury as choosing one energy over the other. We don't have that luxury because 2050 net zero emission target cannot only be achieved only by wind or only by solar. Therefore, we need a portfolio of technologies which I think it will become more critical every other day. You know, we're not speaking about geothermal, biomass, and hydroelectricity that we're not speaking very much. They are named as old technologies, but I think they must be included in our agenda as quickly as possible. This is, you know, a summary in a nutshell. Thank you. I thank you very much for the valuable contributions. Actually, we already see the impacts in Turkey because only us, because of severe drought, consumed an extra 6.5 to 7 billion cubic meters of natural gas since the share of the other types of electricity is falling. This indicates by itself that it's really an emergency. I think it's really going through very frequently. The drought times are quite frequent. It used to be, you know, longer cycles in the past. Like if the year was a dry year, the next 2 or 3 years would not, you know, be potentially dry years. I've been involved in this business for the last 25 years. This is what I recall about this pattern. But it's quite normal that 1 year after a dry year, there will be another drought coming up. So unfortunately, it's become really a top priority area on our agenda. Climate change is critical. Simultaneously, the amount of investment needed for renewables, I think, is just to be discussed in a timely way. Okay, we're approaching the end, not approaching, but it's gone by the end, but still we've asked permission from the audience. There is one announcement that I'd like to make before I close. Actually, these series of meetings are quite useful for all of us. It's really good to have them always. So I'd like to announce the next one. TWEC next panel will take place on February the 9th, Wednesday, 2022. Again, it will be between 11 a.m. and 12:30. Just spare time between 11 and 1 p.m. And so when that day comes again, I'm sure that there will be a good selection, a premium selection of our guests, so we will not be able to finish by time. The global representatives of turbine manufacturing companies will be there. This time we'll be discussing about the new technologies in wind power generation technology. And I think it's going to be an interesting one as well. And to update you about the next WEA meeting, I would like to say that we're extremely honored with your presence. Would like to thank all the panelists and the audience having posed questions, answered questions, and contributed to our debates. And as the Ministry of Energy, and on behalf of our panelists, I'd like to express our gratitude to the audience and see you in the next panel.
İyi günler.